Hey everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we saw about the challenge 1 and the challenge 2 of the XSS, which were quite a simple challenge or beginner level challenge. In this video, we are going to level up and we are going to see challenge number 3 and challenge number 4 basically. Okay, so what exactly is the challenge number 4? So we can see the name of the challenge, the mission description, the mission objective is also there, and obviously our target, and at the bottom we have the code also. So obviously we are not going to check any description or objective, we are just focusing on the target because we know we need to do XSS, and in the real life scenario no one is going to tell you the clue and lot of stuff, right? So let's go ahead and let's try to do XSS. So let's try to identify what exactly is happening in the target. So we have the URL, level 4 is there, the frame is there, and on the screen it is saying the timer. Then we have one input box, then the create timer button is there. Okay, so when I click on the create timer, it waits for 3 seconds and it shows the time is up or time is over, right? So that means whatever I'm entering in that particular input box, it is a second value. So if I want to set the timer for 10 seconds, I'll just enter the 10 and it will create the timer. It will show me alert after the 10 minutes. Okay, so that's really interesting because we can now inject our string in that particular input box and we can manipulate the alert and we can get the alert for ourselves rather than getting for the timer, right? So that's the XSS. So let's try to inject this some kind of script here. Let's say X or XSS is XXX. Okay, and click on the create timer. So still it is creating a timer for 3 seconds rather than giving me some kind of error because I am adding this string. So that means in the backend it is neglecting the string that we are attaching here. So that means they are using parse int in the backend. That's I can assume from this particular behavior. Okay, so in order to check in the detail, let's do one thing. Let's try to check the source code of the. So for checking the code, either I can go to the target code and I can click there, I can check the code. And as I said before, that we have a second option also, which is right click on the view source and you will be able to check the source, right? But you should use the second option, but for me I'm going to use first option. So in the HTML code, can you see right here, it is saying that there is a form and it is sending the get request on submit of the form, which is really get where it is sending action equals to the empty is there, only the double closing is there. That means it will send the get request using the whatever the data we are passing to the exact same URL. That's really great. So in the form body, what is this? So we can see the input element is there, then there is again input element is there, which is button. First is input field, the second is input button. First is input field for the timer where we can enter the value of the seconds. We can say 3, 4, 5, whatever the second is, make sure that it is integer. And even if we are not passing the integer, somehow it is converting to the integer. That means we have the pass int function that will be check later. But if you don't pass the value, it will take the default value as a 3. And obviously we have the submit button where it is saying create a timer. Okay. Now here is a little bit interesting thing. It is not processing the whatever the input we are entering in the client side. Okay, it is processing on the server side. How I know? Because the whatever the value we are entering, it is sending that value to the URL and sending us on the new page. Okay, or sending us the service, sending that service request to the backend. Okay, so that's how I able to basically conclude that the data is being sent to the backend. Okay, now here we have the index.html, then level.py, then timer.html. So you know what is index.html, the current page. You know the level.py, it is a backend Python script where by which by using these particular challenges hosted. What is a timer.html? So when we create a timer, can you see on the screen we see this flicker, the wheel is going on. That's exactly the timer page. It is not same as the previous page. So the previous page is the index.html and the spinner page is basically timer.html. So in the timer.html also, can you see we have only the JavaScript function there. Okay, and it is saying basically start the timer, it is taking the input as a seconds and converting into the parse int. So hence it is using parse int here. it doesn't matter which string we inject, which code we inject, it will not work because it is just converting whatever the value to the pass int. It is extracting only integer values and then creating the alert. So disappointment here, we cannot inject the code in the start timer function. So let's check the backend code and let's see what exactly is happening. So some of you might be wondering what is this code, because it's a Python function. So if you have done the Python development or the Flask app development, then you will easily understand this code. Otherwise, it will have a little bit difficult time to understand. But don't worry, I'll just explain. So basically, what we are doing here is creating a class or any Python function. Basically we are listening who is sending the request, and according to request parameter or according to request we are sending the response. That's what exactly happening in the Python code. So let's try to ignore these part of the code, the main page, the render template, the get request. Ignore that part of the code. Let's try to check the the third and fourth part of the code, which is if not self dot request dot get timer, and then there is a else is also there in the Python, right? So it is basically saying if the timer is not in the request, that means if the timer is not in the URL, if there is not any argument in it or any data in it, then it will just load the index.html page. But if there is any timer value, which can be integer, string, mix of both, then it will load the timer.html. And what exactly it will do, it will pass the timer value as it is in the timer.html. Okay, so here also there is a no input sanitization, or there is no input change. It is directly trusting the user input and passing into the timer.html, which is a really bad thing, and that we can exploit. So let's check the timer.html page and let's see where that timer value is getting used. Okay, so first thing, we obviously know in the JavaScript function, it is using that particular timer value and it is converting into the integer using parseInt function. Okay, but in the body there is a two locations where the timer value is being used. First, in the image tag it is saying on load start timer, and there is a timer value inside that, right? So basically here they are calling the timer function, and just below that we can see there is a message also, your timer will be executed in dash dash seconds, right? So here also there is a no validation of the input string. It is just not sanitizing anything, it is just completely trusting and injecting these two locations. That means these are the two locations where we can inject our code. These are our region of the interest. Okay, so let's try to do a little bit funky here. So as we know, we no matter what we pass in the create timer button, it will just convert into the integer. So let's not work with this particular input element or input field. Let's try to work in the URL completely. So when I change in the URL directly, it is exactly same thing happening. Okay, so let's try to manipulate this particular timer variable and let's try to pass let's say HTML value or HTML code, the script code in it, and let's try to check what is exactly happening in the body, and let's try to see if we are getting any thing or not. Okay, so in the timer after 3 I'll just enter the single quote and I'll see if that is breaking the pattern or not. So let me click on the inspect element and let's observe the what is happening in the body while changing the URL parameter, which is timer. Okay, so can you see right here when I add 3 and the colon, or let's say the single quote is there, it is breaking the logic. So where it is breaking, it is not breaking in the message body, it is breaking in the image tab that is getting created. Okay, so that means for us the message body is completely useless and our script injection will happen in the image tag only. So can you see what is happening here? It is saying start timer. In the function we have the single quote and the 3 is there, and again there is a single quote, again there is a single quote, and then it is closing. That means it is breaking the pattern there. It should have removed that single quote, but it is not, it is just directly passing it, and that's the jackpot. So let's try to complete that function and let's try to close that image tag and let's see if we can inject the code in it. So basically what we are going to do here is our HTML tag of the image, and we are going to do something like this. We are going to complete the code and then enter the our JavaScript, and let's see what is happening. So let me just copy this particular payload, part of the payload, and let me enter in the timer, and let's see what is happening. Okay, so now the code is getting injected and the code is also getting completed, but somehow it is not including the after of the semicolon. So it might be escaping that particular semicolon. So let's do one thing. Let's try to do a little bit trick. So whenever we enter anything in the URL, we either enter it directly and website will encode into the URL encoded format, or we can manually encode that particular in the URL encoded format so that it will be escaped. It will not view as a normal. So let's go ahead, let's go on the Google and let's see URL encoded, and here I will enter the semicolon and we got this particular percentile B, percentile 3b. So let's copy that percentile 3b and let's paste in our payload, and let's see what is happening. So we got the alert on the screen. So yeah, so basically, yeah, it was the that semicolon issue. So when we encoded into the URL, the issue was gone. Okay, now here I know this step is not clickable by normal users, because directly encoding the semicolon in the URL, how will that come into the any normal learner, right? It will not. That's why we have the tutorials, right? We should know the rules of the browser, we should know the how the URL functions, we should know the what kind of URL we can create, what parameters are allowed in the URL, sorry, the what integers are allowed in the URL, what characters are allowed in the URL, what kind of symbols are allowed in the URL, how that symbols can be escaped, how the parameters can be escaped, or any terms whatever we pass in the URL, how usually browser handles it, or how the typical website handles it. That all of this stuff we need to collect the knowledge about, and once we have that particular knowledge in our mind, then we can take a guess. Okay, so what is happening after the semicolon, everything is getting removed, so might be the semicolon is the issue. So let's try to trick here. So let's try to encode this into the URL encoder and let's see what is happening. Okay, because after all, it is just about the how much knowledge you have and what kind of trial and error you are doing, right? So that's all about the finding the vulnerabilities. Okay, so we've just finished the level number 4 or challenge number 4. We are not going to go for the level number 5 and level number 6, that I'm leaving you to solve these particular challenge. But what we are going to do is we are just going to directly jump onto the real life scenario, and we are going to see whether the real life exercises are as simple as this exercise or they are just really crazy hard exercise. So that's what we are going to explore in the next video, and I'm going to show you that it doesn't matter how much hard knowledge you have, sometimes the exercise can be as simple as just adding the alert in the input box, and it will give you $1,000 bounties, right? So yeah, stay tuned and see you in the next video.